to you. So it's really truly an amazing film, and we are so lucky to have the filmmakers. And I think personally Kevin White is the new David Attenborough, but that's my personal opinion. But I know I can't see all the participants, but I'm sure they're doing their silent round of applause. It is really truly an amazing film, and it's really crazy to see up close and personal like that. It's a very different experience. So before we go ahead and get started, Moise, would you like to go ahead and say a few words?
Yeah, we've all been sitting for about an hour, and so I think it warrants maybe a few minute break before we start our panel, say 6:15. In the meanwhile, I just wanted to kind of get back to those initial questions that we framed this event with. Those questions, as we think about fire, we tend to think about fire in a negative context, and in the context of how it harms us. But that's not the only way to think about fire, and especially as hopefully you've watched this film, this documentary, this amazing documentary, and learn from this upcoming panel. You rethink how we relate to fire. Especially, I know from my experience learning from Dr. Stevens and her classes, meeting Elizabeth and Stephen back in 2019 when we first hosted a screening of this documentary at Sac State. It has fundamentally changed my perception of fire, and I hope it will for you too.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and give us a couple minutes, and we will start with the panel at 6:15.
Great.
And if you have not done so already, if you would like your question to be answered, please go ahead and include it in the Q&A chat, and you can upvote questions that you really want to see be answered as well.
Hi, Kelly.
Michelle, hello. Nice to meet you virtually. This is great.
Nice to meet you too.
You know, this film always excites me. It encourages me, and it's just such a wonderful piece to share with so many people, because I think everybody's going to take away something a little bit different.
Well, all we see from the video and the news is horror at fire, and we don't see Quetzalcoatl, we don't see the phoenix rising, we don't see communities rebuilding, and it gives us all hope. And especially working with the tribes and traditional knowledge is thrilling.
Yeah, for sure.
Beautiful.
I see Kevin. Hello, Kevin.
Stephen's right there too.
Oh, Stephen's there. Are you? Oh, there's. Hi, Stephen. Oh my gosh, how fun!
There's Elizabeth.
Yeah.
The whole gang.
Yay! I tell you what, when did we first start filming this? Was this back in the year after the Rim Fire?
Yeah, 2014.
14. Wow. I was thinking about that the other day, about not necessarily a redo, but what about a 10-year anniversary, and just kind of going back to some of these places. I know you're probably already thinking about that, Kevin and Stephen, but I'm fascinated by that, because I think we can learn so much. As time passes, there's still tremendous opportunities to really learn about, our assumptions, right, wrong, or indifferent.
Absolutely. I mean, I would like to think that the public in general has learned a lot more about wildfire and impact, and what the kinds of things we need to think about just to reframe our relationship to wildfire. And yeah. I think that's out there now. But of course it's driven by catastrophe, right. and that's hopefully that will, I mean, I don't know. It's really interesting. I think people are much more knowledgeable about wildfire, clearly. Sure. Just in the panels we have, there's a lot more understanding about it. At the same time, everybody's worried about the coming summer, right?
Maybe justifiably, yeah.
Exactly, with good reason. So.
Awesome. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with this amazing panel. So we're going to go ahead and start with introductions. If you're not here in the beginning, my name is Amanda Courteau. I am the president of the Ensuring Native Indian Traditions, or the ENIT Club, here on the Sacramento State campus. I am a tribal citizen of the Cherokee Nation. And I feel like I have so much to learn. I mean, I grew up in Sacramento, but I really do not know much about cultural burns because my reservation is in Oklahoma. So I really look forward to learning from this amazing panel today. We'll go ahead and start with Kevin. If you can go ahead and reintroduce yourself quickly.
Sure. My name's Kevin White, and I am the director and fellow producer with my good friend and colleague, Stephen Most. We started this film back in, let me see, 2014. And I guess I would just say one thing is that we had no idea that we would be sitting here in 2021 with this history of fires behind us and arguably in front of us as well, and the catastrophe behind them, but that there's also a growing knowledge and awareness about them. So, Steve and I made a short film originally back in 2014, and the weight of the story was pretty heavy. And we really felt like we wanted to do a more substantive piece, and we wanted to do it as an hour piece so it would get on PBS and have a lot of get more traction with viewers. And so I'm pleased to say that we've been able to do that. I mean, we're up to, I don't know, maybe 400 and something views, telecasts on PBS, and we've hit like 60% of the country. And it's, that's the kind of thing, that's why we make films, is we wanted to change some of the narrative about how our relationship to wildfire how we need to rethink that. And so I'm just really glad to be here and this fabulous panel, and just kind of share some insights that I think you'll get from just all the great folks here on the panel. So thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Stephen Most, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, sure. Thank you, Amanda. This is a wonderful event. Thank you for organizing it, you and Moise and your colleagues and Michelle. When the Rim fire occurred in 2013, a friend of mine in the Forest Service said, take a look at this fire, because it's a harbinger of something we're going to see a lot more of. And so I learned a new word, megafire. And megafire is often defined as a wildfire that's 100,000 acres or more, with a fairly high percentage of severely burned land, wild land. And I started looking into it because wildfires were really not a subject of public interest. Scientists knew, fire professionals like Kelly knew that things were changing, but the public really was not interested at all, except the Rim fire happened to burn some of Yosemite, which is iconic landscape. And we were concerned about Hetch Hetchy because that's a water supply. So we thought, well, let's make a film about the Rim fire that makes it a kind of model for this new kind of fire. And the reason I thought this was a phenomenon that needed watching was, I went back to 1985, and annually across the United States, about 2 million acres burned. And by 2014, when we started working on the film, it was double that, 4 million acres. And as we worked on the film, things got even more intense, more area was burned. Just to give you a quick sketch, last year, 4.4 million acres burned in California alone, and 10 million in the country as a whole. So we really needed to understand why this was happening. We were dealing with competing ideologies. One said wildfire is terrible, categorically. These tended to be people who wanted to protect timber from burning. Then there were other people in the John Muir tradition that separates nature from human beings that said, wildfire is natural, let it burn, it's great habitat. So we had to figure out what was going on and come to an understanding. And I gotta say that in making the film, Kevin and I learned a tremendous amount from Kelly Martin, from Elizabeth Azuz, from Malcolm North, who was our science advisor. It was a great education, and we're glad to be able to share what we learned through the film with you.
Thank
Now
you.
I guess I'll toss it to Michelle.
Yes.
I decided today that I'm going to speak as myself. I'm a descendant of the Nez Perce tribe of the Colville Reservation. And on Sunday, my father and my aunt, who are 93 and 90, are meeting together, and they're losing their stories. They're losing our oral tradition because they're losing their memories. And since I also was privileged when I did my doctorate, I worked on a plant called whiteroot or Carex barbarae, which is a really important, ethnobotanically important basket plant. And I got to work with beloved elders in the Miwok community who are also gone. So I feel like it's time to speak from the heart and from my knowledge of several decades. So I'm a restoration ecologist. I went through college by fighting fires. First year they hired women, so it was a bit sexist, you could say, politely. And when I worked for Washington Department of Ecology as the head wetlands ecologist, I wrote 2 different restoration books, one for EPA, one for Department of Ecology, and they took out the part on traditional ecological knowledge and traditional resource management. When I worked on my doctorate, I worked with the Miwok people. I did ethnobotany. And it was this year, 2020, that I finally was able to publish the results of that study in Wetlands Journal, a scientific journal, because besides our knowledge of fire, we're shifting dramatically the paradigm with which we think of our relationship with nature. And I think we're able to articulate and respect Western science and compare and contrast traditional knowledge or Western ecological knowledge and traditional ecological knowledge, so we can work with fire as a team, we can work as a community. And the important part of that as well is to work with our non-human relations. These are a lot of trees in those million acres, and it's time for restoration. And they are not just standing carbon. They're living, sentient, ancient beings with this them and their spirits, and they're ready to come back like the phoenix rising. And that's what's so beautiful about this movie, is we can work at human and non-human communities to address using fire as a tool instead of in an adversarial position and putting it out.
Absolutely. And for those who have not had the opportunity to meet your wonderful self, would you mind stating what you do at Sacramento State?
I'm a professor in the Environmental Studies Department, and I teach restoration, wetlands, and ethnoecology. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I really look forward to hearing some of your answers to the questions I have for you today. I would like to pass it on to Elizabeth Azuz. If you could introduce yourself, that would be awesome.
Aikui, Neknu, Elizabeth Azuz. Hello, it's great to be here. I'm honored. My name is Elizabeth Azuz. I'm the secretary for the Cultural Fire Management Council in northeastern Humboldt County on the Yurok Reservation. We're approximately 40,000 hectares of tribal ancestral territory land, and we live along the confluence of the Klamath and Trinity rivers. So 42 miles from the mouth of the Pacific into Wichpec, on a mile on either side of the river, is the reservation territory where we live. This section of the reservation is very isolated. There's one way in and one way out, unless you know all of the back roads. It's 100 years of fire seclusion. So you can imagine what that does to the forest floor. Our people were interviewed by Building Healthy Communities and asked what we needed here. when we had over 250 interviews with community members, and the one thing that came to the forefront was not hospitals, it wasn't transportation, it wasn't a grocery store. What it was to bring fire back to the land. Our elders wanted fire back on the land because our basket materials were not available to us any longer. I'd say 90% of our basket materials are serotinous plants, which require fire in order to be usable and pliable. Our food securities was suffering greatly because our food plants were not replenishing themselves. Our basket materials were not replenishing themselves. Our waterways were suffering. Our fish were not getting enough cold water. And so we set out in 2012 to do a prescribed burn. It was in collaboration with CAL FIRE and the Yurok tribe, and we were able to burn 7.5 acres. Tiny burn, considering the size of our reservation. However, 7 years later, going on 8 years, we are now a nonprofit. We have close to $1 million grant with CAL FIRE, which we're using on a 5-year project to restore the 169 corridor in our reservation, which was basically inundated with arson when we first started. We had approximately 80 arsons within a year, within that particular year. And after our treks, our training exchanges, and our work together with the community, we're down to maybe 1 or 2 arsons. And it's usually somebody who's pretty upset at someone else. And we're able to handle that as a community. But I'm honored to be here. I'm excited to see all of the participants, the panelists. I miss you all. COVID has kept us apart. And it's heartwarming to see all of the amazing comments, all the amazing people, and the fact that we are here now to help the one-legged tree people, to help the animals, to help the land breathe, to help each other, to be here for one another. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We are so honored to have you. So thank you for being here. The last person, but definitely not least, that I'd like to introduce is Kelly Martin. So feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, and it's just really a great pleasure to be here with all of you, and so great to see some familiar faces and working with Kevin and Stephen on this project for, dare I say, it's probably not too short to say we're approaching 10 years, but my name's Kelly Martin. I am a retired fire chief of Yosemite National Park. I worked there from 2006 to my recent retirement in 2019. And prior to that, I worked quite a bit with the U.S. Forest Service. So my interest has always been, as a practitioner on the ground, really promoting the wise use of fire on the landscape. I've kind of grown up with the introduction of fire. It has been persecuted over the years, especially early on in my career. And I have really seen the value and the benefit of this natural element on the landscape. And so for me, you know, working with Kevin and Stephen on this film has just been a tremendous opportunity to really share the intimate knowledge that Indigenous cultures have, and those of us really wishing to use fire on the landscape as a positive benefit for ecosystem services is truly monumental. I don't think there's any other film that really highlights the important need for fire on the landscape and good fire, right fire at the right place. So I'm excited for this panel. I'm also excited about the youth in the room. And for those of you that are just making or thinking about what kind of jobs that you would like to do or what kind of careers you would be interested in the years to come. I will say that climate change doesn't seem to be going away, and the influence of fire, the effects of fire because of climate change is not going away either. Smoke management, impacts on human health, the rapid urbanization and development of our communities into these hazardous areas. It's all really going to take not only our current generation, but the next generation below me and the next generation below you to really think about how we're going to address these in a very public forum way, you know, politically, socially, economically, and environmentally. And that's why I'm so excited about being here. And I will, every opportunity I have to be part of a panel member for you to ask the tough questions and really do the deep dive about how does fire play a role in our lives, not only today, but in the next 50 years to 100 years, because this is multi-generational, intergenerational for many, many years to come. And the more that we can really reach out and have these discussions with people, I really think that we can learn to embrace it and not persecute fire. So thanks all for inviting me to this panel. I'm really, really pleased and excited to be here with you tonight.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So Kevin and Stephen already answered my first question, so I'm gonna move on to the next because we do have a lot of questions in the Q&A chat there. So this is for Kevin and Stephen. So how have California wildfires changed since you started making Wilder Than Wild? And what can communities do to prepare for wildfires in residential areas?
Well, I would say, I mean, the first thing I would say is they've changed considerably in the sense that we have a lot more of them than we did back in, say, 2013, 2014, when what really initiated this is in 2013 when the rim fire happened. As you know, my cabin is close to that, and it was really clear, as Steve said, that this was like what they call a mega fire, and this had a whole different footprint, a whole different impact on the forest. And it started out as curiosity, but then it soon became bigger than that. And to make this film and then see how quickly the fires started to come into the wildland urban areas in just catastrophic ways, that seems to be a pattern that we've been seeing a lot of, particularly the last, since 2018. And I don't, it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge. There's all kinds of ways we can think about it. And I would say that, probably, certainly Kelly and Michelle may have more ideas about how to make a place fire safe. But I will say that I'm encouraged by the collaboration and by the growth of the fire safe groups all across California, all across the West, all across fire-prone areas. I'm encouraged by the collaboration I'm seeing both with the tribes and with CAL FIRE. I mean, that didn't happen till recently. And to me, the solution is going to be all about collaborating and working together and figuring out strategies, and then bringing those messages to the public so that we can bring them into the fold so they can start to take responsibility for their own areas, their own places. And one of the key things that starts with is knowing your neighbors. It seems silly, but that thing about knowing your neighbors, you know how many people were saved in fires because they knew their neighbors. They knocked on the door, they got them out. Maybe they were infirm or whatever, but that kind of sense of community and that we're in this together seems to me the solution for addressing this. And panels like this with different perspectives and very thoughtful, wise people. So, I think we're going to see some more fires, and I'm sure we will. And maybe we can start to understand that fire has its own footprint in a lot of different ways. And it's not something to be villainized. It's something to be understood and worked with. So
when we started the film looking at fires in the forests, and we thought that was where we needed to focus. And more than 90% of the fires in California are human caused one way or another, directly or indirectly through power lines. And one of the reasons there have been more fires is that more people have been moving into the wildland areas, so more opportunities for ignition. But as we made the film, the fires started moving into the more populated areas. And this really requires a paradigm shift in our way of thinking about fire, because we who live in an urban area, we live in these houses, we might not know our neighbors. We think about a fire starting from inside the house rather than coming down on our whole community and burning row after row after row of house like trees in a forest. One thing that inspired Kevin and myself while making the film was seeing Yosemite Stanislaus solutions. We saw environmentalists and loggers working together, because what they have in common is the land. And this is something I also experienced making a film about the Klamath Basin, in which the tribes and the non-Indians, the commercial fishing people, came together to do the dam removal, the farmers, because everyone was suffering, and everyone had in common a love of the land. So the potential for collaboration to improve our environment is something that is often not noticed. And this is also something that unites now rural people with urban people, because it's not just there in the forest. You know, it's when a fire happens in the woods, we should all pay attention to it, because it can come very quickly into our communities. And just to add a figure to what Kevin said, the fire in Coffey Park in 2017 that we covered, there were about 9,000 houses burned and 44 people died. 44 people is tragic, but consider the disproportion. And that's because people went from door to door, banging on each other's doors, breaking windows, making sure that people could get out, knowing your neighbors. So it's incumbent on us, who might think of ourselves as living in a house and our separate worlds, to realize where we are in a broader sense. And the last thing I want to say about this is that wildfires, this increase in wildfires, it's a global phenomenon. It's really happening all over the world. We read about it all the time. Australia, for example. But every wildfire is local. You know, the ignition source is local, the weather conditions, the winds, for example, that's local, the topography, the vegetation, and the built environment is local. So wildfires, while they're a global phenomenon in this increase, need to be addressed in terms of each community. And the ways to respond to them might have to do with changing infrastructure. We've had these power shutoffs, for example. We have an obsolete energy transmission system that's causing a lot of the ignitions. Doing preventive fires, working with local tribes, as well as with local and state governments. These are all opportunities that we need to explore to create a community that understands in a better way than we have before our shared relationship with the natural world.
Thank you for that. And I really liked how you guys talked about community. I mean, fires and just natural disasters in general do not discriminate. So really getting to know your neighbor and having that escape plan, I think, is really essential. Awesome. Thank you for that. So my next question is for Dr. Michelle Stevens. So Dr. Stevens, can you discuss the equity of different knowledge systems, especially traditional ecological knowledge and traditional resource management compared to Western science? And how does this relate to fire?
Good question. I think the dominant culture has only seen Western science and Western scientific knowledge systems. All the early fire ecologists would only talk about lightning ignitions, and now they're really incorporating the traditional fire management. So first of all, in traditional knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge, there's a profound relationship that's much broader than Western science, in that it incorporates the past, it incorporates future generations, it incorporates all our relations, all beings, all non-human relations. It's also global. Fire's used globally as an important tool. Like Stephen was saying, Australia, I had the opportunity to work with the marsh Arabs in Iraq and the Mesopotamian marshes. It's not just forests that are burned. In fact, the valley, these grassland, foreland, beautiful vernal pools were probably burned every year. The riparian areas were burned to keep them open. So this knowledge of a dense, I mean, think of this. California was sustainably tended for thousands and thousands of years at high densities, wouldn't that mean that there's some knowledge there? So Western knowledge systems, we learn in statistics, we teach in our college. It's sort of a diachronic database. It's supposed to be value neutral, multiple replicates, short time frame. You do a journal article. So here we all are teaching our students in this academic institution in Western science. And traditional knowledge is a diachronic database. It's over a long period of time, and it treasures and values the knowledge of the elders and the oral traditions. And the relationship with the resource is important. It's not value neutral, but both share observation, monitoring, adaptive management, caring for the land, building community. So we have this commonality, but two different ways of looking at it. And I think it's just so positive right now that we can honor, respect, and incorporate the sovereign, indigenous, First Nation knowledge. And for everybody out there in the audience, there are no Native Americans. There are no Native Americans. There are individual tribes with individual relationships to the land and traditions. So when we do our land acknowledgement, we're really acknowledging the caretakers and the ancestors of this particular place. And I can answer more questions later, but I do want to let you know something I'm working on and ask for your help. I'm doing an ecocultural restoration at Bushy Lake, and I would like to form a circle of tribal people, independent from the government stakeholders, to help guide me. I have a relationship with plants and a green thumb, so I've gotten some good cultural plants going out there. And just one little more point, just think of this. Think of milkweed or Indian hemp. So that took 60,000 stalks in one gill net. And think if you're making a gill net and then the fish are flashing around and then you're breaking it down, and then you have all these other things you're using fiber for. And guess what? There's no milkweed on the landscape, hardly at all. And guess what else? We've lost 99% of our beautiful monarchs, the stained glass windows of the sky. That in itself, that symbol tells you this relationship of cultural knowledge and growing the milkweed and bringing back the monarchs. It all goes together. It's a circle. And so it's really a positive time because we're talking to each other, hopefully honoring each other and working together. And fire is a powerful tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stevens. It's very powerful. And I always love listening to you talk because you're so passionate about, ecological restoration and indigenous practices. So thank you for that. My next question is for Elizabeth Azuz. Do you consider fire lighting a part of your culture, and what exactly does that mean?
Absolutely. Fire lighting is part of our culture. Traditionally, we have water carriers, we have fire carriers, we have song, dance, storytellers. There's so many things that are assigned to us as young people by the way our elders saw us or felt how we behaved. For me, I grew up in a medicine family. So I was taught at a very young age what I could and couldn't do, should and shouldn't do. And, I started burning at 4. My grandfather, who was Karuk, was blind, but he could smell the smoke. And he insisted that I come sit below him because that's where the younger people belonged, at the feet of their elders. And he told me that fire kept us warm. Fire cooked our food. Fire restored our land. It restored the waterways. And so all of those stories, having grown up in an oral history, have stuck with me and constantly remind me in the back of my head how important it is to combine all of those aspects of our life, to realize that when we're restoring the land, when we're burning, we're also leaving behind charcoal and ash that's restoring the waterways. The smoke that we put up in a prescribed fire can drop the temperature of the water by at least 2 degrees, which brings the temperature down for our aquatic brothers and sisters so that they can travel the waterways. You know, the connection that everything has on this earth is sometimes just set down. You know, people, especially in civilization, because I live off grid, literally at the confluence of the Klamath and Trinity rivers, I don't realize until I leave home, you know, that the rest of the world doesn't see it the way I see it. The rest of the world fears fire. To me, fire is family. Fire is a tool to help us to cook our food, to restore our land, to restore our medicine, you know, our prairies and meadows, so that we can reintroduce elk into our high country. They now travel historic pathways that had been blocked to them for over 100 years because we weren't allowed to put fire on the ground. So now to be able to watch those elk, and it was his goal, that was his dream. And since he has passed on from us, we continue to burn his prairies and his meadows. We continue to carry fire there so that his grandson will be able to see those elk cross that prairie and that meadow. There's an interconnectedness between us and our land. I say our land, I mean everybody's land. We all live on this planet. If we don't take care of her, she won't be here to take care of us. You know, it's our responsibility, as I've been taught, as a true human being, to care for everything around us. Care for the people in your life, care for the trees, the water, the birds. You know, I have caught myself speaking to trees. Of course, they don't answer, but, you know, when we start our training exchanges, I put up smoke. I put up smoke in woodworm and angelica root and pitch. The reason I do that, those are medicine plants for us. And when I put that smoke up into the atmosphere, I ask the one-legged people and the winged people and the, you know, the water people, if it's okay to come into their home, to bring fire to them, if it's okay to restore the land so the mother can breathe, if it's okay to restore the water so that the aquatic people can travel. You know, connect yourself to your land, connect yourself to your family, to your community. You know, reach out to those elders that may not have anybody to help them. And in that way, we connect ourselves to fire, and fire connects itself to us. We're all here. We're all humans. We're all from this planet. Let's take care of ourselves. Let's take care of each other. Let's take care of those things that need us and that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. That was extremely powerful. And I will say, you know, some parents, especially in Sacramento, I'm sure if you told them you started lighting fires at 4 years old, they would think something totally different. But it's truly amazing. And I encourage everyone to learn about the cultures of, you know, the people whose land they're occupying. It is truly amazing. And I recommend just sitting outside. And I've done this before. I sit outside and I look up and I get to see the birds that fly over my house every day, and the trees are there. And just familiarize yourself with your surroundings, I think, is a very powerful experience. So thank you for that. My last question before we get to the Q&A chat is for Kelly Martin. So did the approach to fighting fires change since the inclusion of women in firefighting? How so?
Oh, that's always a really good discussion. When I started, I would sometimes look around the room and I'd be the only woman in the room. But I knew that this was a job that I really wanted to do. And so I guess I tell people that, you know, especially young women, if this is something you're really interested in, it's just, you have to have, you know, no pun intended, but that burning desire and that passion to really want to study and learn about this amazing element. So I think in a way, you know, women bring, you know, just like anything else in our workforce, that, you know, women and men complement each other. And without women, it's heavily weighted towards a very masculine approach to fire. And I think women really bring that approach to caring, communication, community, its utilization for plants and animals for the family benefit. So there's also that, for me, I've always, again, I don't persecute fire. I do know that fire can harm and help. And so really, I've spent my entire career really studying how fire, how and when and under what conditions will fires hurt people, and where and when and under what conditions is the land really asking you and telling you that, I need this fire to breathe. I need this fire to live. I need this fire to regenerate the grasses, the plants, and provide more habitat for additional plants and animals on the land. And so developing that spiritual connection with the land, I think, having women in fire that really can embrace that and really think about fire in a different way, rather than muscling it and rather than seeing it as a war to be fought and won. I just really, within my career, I have a certain connection that it's hard to even talk about, because I know a lot of people think that, when you see fire on the landscape, that it's bad, that it has to be suppressed. But I really take a very, very different view of it, because I have gone back into, the areas that have not burned very hot, and it's been very restorative. And the number of birds coming back into an area when there's still smoke on the ground, the deer that come back into an area is really very, very powerful. So for me, I think that, throughout my career, throughout my life, I've gained a very intimate sense of place on this earth about how important fire is to not only the natural and the cultural environment, but even to our own spiritual, mental, and physical well-being. And it's definitely something that's near and dear to my heart. And I think as we, move into the future with fire, is how we can, establish a relationship with fire and know fire as a friend, and understand, when it's appropriate to really truly, listen to the indigenous and native cultures that have used fire for so many years. I've learned so much from Elizabeth and others when really providing that sacred offering when we begin a burn. Because if you really listen and if you really look and you really feel, you can kind of tell, where that power is coming from. And humans really have a tremendous influence in creating that opportunity for that land to really thank you for being the steward of that landscape. And it's incredible, the rewards that you will see. I've gone back to almost every fire that I've ever been on. I really want to go back like a year later, and I want to listen and I want to see, did I do a good job? Did I steward the land, appropriately? And oftentimes I'm just rewarded with just incredible color and richness and water and life after a fire. So I just wish that, that more people could really feel that. And certainly it's I think me from my family and being a woman and knowing that I'm not fearful. I don't persecute it. I embrace it. And I think that that's what's really, I don't want to say missing. I mean, there's definitely a physical side to creating a career in fire. But think about it for a moment. If we had some kind of balance and parity with, traditional ecological knowledge and more women that really came into this profession and really helped stewarding the next 50 to 100 years of fire on the landscape, what that might look like for our communities and the health, of our not just this generation, but for many, many generations to come. So I'm excited. I do everything I can to encourage more women to engage in this conversation and really think about this as a career. Even though I've had my trials and tribulations, as a woman in fire in a predominantly male dominated environment, but I would not for the world. It's enriched me in ways that I can't even begin to describe. So it's exciting for me to be involved in training and opportunities to engage more women in wildland fire management.
Thank you for that. And no pun intended, but you are definitely a trailblazer within your field. So I just thought of that one. I'm super proud of myself. So thank you very much for your input.
Yeah. Well, if I can inspire others, I think, I mean, that's a great gift, that if people, can see that, hey, Kelly's been able to do this, and that's something I'm interested in doing. That's very honorable. And I'm very excited that maybe other people would pursue this with just as much, interest and love and passion that I had throughout my career. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you. So now we're going to the Q&A chat. So if you've not done so already, please make sure to upvote any questions that you would like to see answered, because I'm going from top to bottom. So our first question is going to be open to all of our panelists. Has there been discussion to return federal or state managed land back to Native tribes so that we can rebuild forest health through cultural fire stewardship? Anyone is open to answer this question.
I could take that on a little bit. I can't say that there's really been a discussion, but I think there is more broad acceptance of Native tribes and cultural application of fire. Not, we as in the federal government, when we apply fire on the landscape, we're definitely thinking about, reducing fuels and creating forest resiliency. But to Native tribes, there's a real cultural aspect to putting fire back on the landscape. So I'm, for one, very excited to see that that's more accepting now than it ever has been in the past.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephen's
There
trying
we go. The Forest Service, at least on the West Coast, has an inkling of the importance of having local tribal members manage forests, because their former liaison with the tribes, Merv George, who had been a chairman of the Hoopa Valley Tribal Council, became the forest superintendent of the Six Rivers National Forest, which is right in his home country. And Merv George, I interviewed him. It didn't get into the film, but he's from a ancient and profound family of leaders, and is very much an advocate of traditional ecological knowledge, which he wanted to combine with the usual fire management of the Forest Service to bring indigenous local wisdom to that forest. Now, unfortunately, the Forest Service moved him, as they do, to forest superintendents, but he's now in Oregon, not so far from his home country. And I hope that Merv George's role as a forest supervisor, which is a very powerful and influential one, is a harbinger of the fact that the Forest Service understands the value of traditional ecological approaches to fire. Then the other important development, which is happening right now, is the fact that the Secretary of the Interior is a Native person. This is, and so much of our land is managed by the Department of the Interior. So this can mean a real transformation in the use of traditional ecological knowledge on federal lands. We will see, but I'm hopeful.
Thank you,
Just
Stephen.
one more part to that is California Indian tribes got, there's no other word to say it, screwed in terms of land holding more than any other state in the country. So tribes in like Washington, the Colville, the Walla Walla, it's so cool. They're taking over ecocultural restoration on their land. They're bringing back the fish. They're working with beaver. It's just really wonderful. And even in the Great Plains area, bringing back the buffalo to the Great Prairies. Also, the Park Service has some interesting papers on co-management. So having co-management of tribes with the parks, instead of like having Ben Cunningham or Julia Parker just be wonderful, knowledgeable, fantastic cultural demonstrators, but they should be able to live in the park, manage the park, be part of the park. And so I think we're moving in a good direction. And I also think there's a long ways to go.
Thank you. Would any other panelists like to go ahead and touch on the topic? Going once, going twice. Okay. All right, our next question. This is a long one, so keep it in your brain. How do current prescribed burn protocols compare to the Yurok tribe's traditional burning practices? Were prescribed burns originally performed during summer or fall and not winter or spring like they typically are now? If there is a discrepancy, what are the ecological implications? Elizabeth, would you like to go ahead and answer this question?
Yeah, so for me, obviously growing up as a young person on this reservation, I was taught that if I saw a green truck or a red truck that I was supposed to run. And that was because we could be arrested or shot or, basically killed for, restoring the land. As an adult, I do the logistics and planning for our training exchanges. That requires a lot of permitting. There's a lot of government red tape that goes along with what we do. And being a sovereign nation, we don't necessarily fit into those confines, but being someone who lived in civilization for approximately 30 years of my life, I realized the importance of dealing with all of the agencies on a level that gives us a level playing field. So having all my permits in place, having all my paperwork in place for CAL FIRE, for the Forest Service, for the air quality, even though our tribe has all of those entities, I still have to get those papers signed by my tribe also. So I go before tribal council, we ask permission. We go before our culture committee, we ask permission. I go before the tribal's air quality, get permission from them, get their paperwork, their permits, through our environmental program. Our tribe is almost a slightly bit more restrictive than the government itself because, we know the value of our land. We know what's going to happen if we lose control of that fire. We know what is going to be the one thing that is going to shut us down if we don't follow the proper procedures and the proper protocols. So I probably jumped through more hoops than anyone I know in order to make this work. But I want it to work for all of us. I want us to be an example of what people see when they're trying to create prescribed burns on their reservations. I want the government to know that the natives are taking this serious, that it's important for us to be, I would say, even more compliant with these regulations because, we're the people who hold this traditional ecological knowledge, and we've had it since time immemorial, but now it's time to share. This doesn't just belong to us as a people. It belongs to everybody on this planet, because if we do not do this right, we won't be here for the next generation. We need to do this right. We need to make sure that we follow every procedure, every protocol. We need to make sure that Kelly's job, now retired from, would be something she wouldn't have to, endanger her people to be able to go out and take care of that fire. There's so much to this that we all need to look at, and as human beings, it's everybody's responsibility to do this. It's everyone's responsibility to think about the forest, to think about the water, to think about everything. And if we all think we're not connected, we have a long ways to go. So, get those permits, get that paperwork. It is a pain in the backside. I will be the first person to tell you that. We burn twice a year, and it is all year long process to make sure all those permits are in place, the paperwork's in place, and that everybody's happy so that we can burn for approximately 2 weeks in the year, a week in the spring and a week in the fall. The reason our burning has changed, in my opinion, is I also run the Food Securities Division for Cultural Fire Management Council. I'm having to plant my starts 2 or 3 months ahead of what I would normally have to do. So you can see that the seasons are changing. You know that things are not in the same balance they were. So paying attention to your environment, you know, pay attention to when the birds are moving, when the animals are moving. You know, we, in the Cutout tribe, if Pleiades has left the sky, there's no more fire going to touch the ground for that season, because the birds are on the ground nesting. Animals are nesting, animals are birthing. You know, we cannot upset the balance of our environment just because we need to restore that environment. We need to also look at the creatures that live there. We are not the only ones here.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's really powerful. And it goes back to just step outside one morning, eat breakfast outside, and really just kind of look around. Put your phone down. I know it's hard. And just, you know, look around, see what's moving. Is there birds out there? You know, look what the trees look like. What kind of bugs do you see? Just really get in touch with your surroundings. I think is super powerful. So we have our next question from Jose Mejia. How can we pressure politicians in the state capital to pass laws to support tribes in burning and bringing back fire practices in their areas? And this goes for all panelists. No, it's a very loaded question.
Extremely loaded question. Wow. You know, California right now, I think, is on the cusp of doing exactly that. There's some legislature going through for prescribed burning. There's more funding that's been made available for prescribed burning. The grants that are available to, you know, not just Native peoples, but to all people to do land restoration, prescribed burning is huge right now. So, you know, I think we're really honestly trying to move in a good direction. And I think the sooner we do that, the better.
So to kind of facilitate this question, how could someone like myself or my club go ahead and pressure the state capitol to go ahead and push this legislation? Would, you know, writing be best to whoever needs to be written to, or what is the best way to go ahead and approach that?
You know, I'll take a shot at that too. I think the old adage really applies here too, is all politics are local. And so really getting engaged with your local politicians and your local elected officials, that's the first place to start. So even though we tend to want to gravitate to, you know, state bills and state legislation, really develop that strong sense of community at a local level first. And that's really where you begin to meet your neighbors, you meet your elected officials. And dare I say, once you start thinking about doing a prescribed burn, and managing fire, you have the ability now to contact your elected officials and say, I just want to go on record by saying I'm really supporting this project. And so that really kind of grows and develops over time, but really knowing what you can do and really develop, you know, even festivals, if you will, prescribed fire festivals. I've heard that being done in the locally too. To me, that's more powerful. And that's longer lasting, of developing community wildfire protection plans and really influencing local ordinances. And then also going on the record by saying you support these projects, because oftentimes what we hear is the complaints and the negative calls that come in, and then all of a sudden, you know, things start getting shut down. And imagine for a moment if we had one complaint every, you know, 10 compliments. So that's very, very powerful. And that's how you can really use your voice to really impact socially, economically, and politically within your local community. So start there and then move into the state house and then the federal government for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think Kelly did a great job of speaking to that. I'll jump in a little bit on this question. Hi, everyone. Again, for those who might have missed it, my name is Moise. I work as the program coordinator for 350 Sacramento, and I'm helping with the logistics and putting on this event and making sure it all works. But definitely get involved locally. That's what advocacy is. That's what community building is. And that's exactly what 350 Sacramento does. Find a 350, whatever city you're in or whatever county you're in. There are people doing that work on a daily basis in the long term at every level of government. Get involved in it.
Well, I'd like to speak to an issue that comes up that does require political advocacy, specifically with your local air quality board.
For
Because
sure.
when a prescribed fire occurs, it creates smoke. And one does it, as I learned from Kelly, under the conditions when the smoke is not going into populated areas populated by humans, when there's little danger of the fire escaping. It's not a sure thing, and people don't really want there to be smoke in the air. We have this idea of sunny California, which is an artifact of of fire suppression. But in fact, it's really important to have prescribed burns and teach people that the smoke that comes from them is something that we really should welcome. Now that's important because without prescribed burns, we have these mega fires with tremendous amounts of smoke. As we saw last year, there was smoke up and down the West Coast, blanketing huge areas, affecting populations so that everyone was trying to get an air conditioner. So people have to learn to tolerate deliberately lit fires and the smoke that comes from that so that we don't get these tremendous amounts of smoke from mega fires. And that takes political work. It takes persuading your neighbors. It takes persuading the air quality boards. And that's one of the major obstacles to prescribed burning, certainly in California.
Thank you. So you definitely just answered my next question, which is, what is the biggest barrier to increasing the use of wildland fire in California? Which I think they're trying to say, what is the biggest barrier to increasing prescribed burns within California? If someone wants to quickly touch that subject.
I can kind of take that one on too, is, think about California in 1900. Do you know how many people lived in California then?
Me personally, I have zero idea.
1.5 million. Do you know how many of the people live there now?
That's how many people live in Sacramento, so I'm guessing a lot more.
So 40 million. So within 100 years, the population of California has just exploded. So you can imagine for a moment that not only is population an issue, imagine how many people are smoke sensitive. So the acceptance, there really isn't that acceptance or that mind shift yet there from a stewardship perspective that says, yes, we definitely want more prescribed burns. I'm a huge proponent. I'd much rather see, good fire on the landscape under less than extreme conditions. You're going up here in the spring. This is a really good, spot to start reducing some fuels. But when you're in here in August, and you just have, huge watersheds that are taken out by fire, it has tremendous consequences for biodiversity. But scaling up to something like that is very, very difficult. I don't really have the answers here, but here's some of the obstacles that we have. We have an old antiquated suppression program that was developed well over 50 years ago that is still in place today. We call them forestry technicians. I'm actually in a nonprofit right now called Grassroots, and we're really trying to advocate for a unique emergency responder position, description, and classification for wildland firefighters that really addresses the current needs, the training, the experience, and the qualification, because we're really seeing that people are leaving this profession and they're going to state municipal fire departments because they just really can't make a decent living doing this job. So you can imagine, how long does it take a 15-year firefighter when they leave and go to another fire department? How long does it take to replace them? Another 15 years. So we're really in a quandary right now, with a lot of different, both environmental, political, and social impacts to the wildland fire suppression program and the prescribed fire program. Again, I'm a huge proponent of mechanical fuels treatment, removal, prescribed burn, but we have not developed the infrastructure yet to really equal the suppression industry. The suppression industry is a $3 billion a year industry. We have near that, maybe not even a tenth of that gets allocated from Congress every year. So it's very, very complicated, multifaceted, but having these kind of conversations, even in a roundtable discussion for another, point in time, because planning and zoning comes into play, insurance companies come into play, developers come into play, real estate agents. So you can see how this just is this like 10-headed monster, when we think about adding more fire to the landscape, when people are just thinking, what are you thinking? More fire? We've already had tremendous amount of fire, but really we have to help people understand that in order to really enhance forest resiliency, landscape resiliency over time, we actually need to apply more good fire. So we need to fight fire with fire.
It's funny because I've always been told differently.
I'd like to add something to that, and that's how we prioritize where we put our resources. And this is once again the difference between traditional knowledge and human home knowledge, you could say. So Frank Lake and Jonathan Long and some other tribal representatives in the Forest Service have created a map locating key biodiversity areas. And at this point in time, our giant sequoias and redwoods, even though they are adapted to fire, are being wiped out by our redwoods, our sequoias, and all the creatures that live there. And these last islands of old growth forest and their relationships are often also sacred lands for Native people. We need to have equal importance for tribal priorities and biodiversity priorities to people who have home incursions in Malibu.
Yep, I agree. Good point, Michelle. Very good point. Yep.
They need their time too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm with you 100%.
Yes, thank you. And Dr. Stevens, if you can go ahead and answer my next question, that would be great. So we kind of answered the first half of it, so we'll move on to the second half. What effects do wildfires have on habitats that are not adapted to the intense fires? Are there any restoration projects to help restore areas that have been destroyed by the fires? And then they said, thank you.
Oh gosh, I kind of think maybe Stephen and Kevin working with the communities on the rim fire, and Kelly and might be better able to answer this from a restoration ecologist perspective. The Forest Service and BLM have BARE teams, and it's so cool. They've got top of the line GPS units, and they're like mapping resources right while the fire's burning. Is this area going to erode? How hot is this burning? Does this need bank stabilization? Kind of going bit by bit by bit, so that they can especially prioritize mass wasting, landslides, soil erosion, which the soil just kind of turns to glass with these mega fires. Also the streams, and trying to maintain barriers around them for the fish. But, when you talk to Frank Lake, and I'm sure Elizabeth knows about more, like tons more than I do, but that kind of restoration is different than this is in a really old manzanita that's important for our tribe, or this is a beautiful red bed that we want the red branches on for basketry, or, there's these other cultural sensitive resources that also, you can just drive over them with a bulldozer. So I think tribes and restoration ecologists need to work together. And the other last thing I think of and I pray about is, gosh, what are all these animals going to do to eat right now with all this big fire, where especially the deer, the pronghorn, the mountain lions, the bears. I mean, when they come out, what are they going to eat? So making sure that we have native plants to replant for browsing and animal food is really important.
Thank you. Yes, would any other panelists like to go ahead and touch on this topic?
I would, because here's an area where Western science and indigenous knowledge coexist and complement each other. Malcolm North, who's in the film, and Eric Knapp, also a Forest Service fire ecologist, have worked on a study of how the forest was before non-Indians came here. What was the structure of the forest? And we're talking now about the Sierra mid-altitude mixed conifer forest. And the structure that they found was individual large trees, clumps of trees, and open areas. Open areas with meadows, for example, that are a great way to store water. And that structure, ICO, is their way of symbolizing it. Individual trees, clumps, and open areas is also fire resilient because you don't have contiguous trees that the fire just moves along unbroken. So there's been, and they have, in an experimental forest, they have created this kind of structure, but this was the kind of structure that existed before fire suppression, before our forests became so thick that they were just food frenzy for fire. So you might look into that work. I don't remember the exact number of the study. Maybe it's GS 220. Kelly, do you remember this?
I don't remember. Yeah. I was following that for a little while, but yeah, just a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done for sure.
Thank you. And I saw
And
Elizabeth.
I'd like to add on to that. Yeah, so Cultural Fire Management Council has added some pieces to our repertoire. Basically, we have an ethnobotanist. So they go out, they photograph an area, they look at all the plants, they do a complete study on it before we burn it. And then they go back in after the burn and they replant it with native seed that we've gathered from this area. One of our recent burns, I was just there today, and the elder that lives on that property is ecstatic because of all of the yerba buena that's come back, the angelica, the miner's lettuce. His hillside is covered with trilliums, which he had never seen there before. The plants that are coming back on his property, he's really excited about because he knows that our crew went in there and replanted it after we burned. So he's able to watch that full cycle happen. He's seen them come out and study his property. He's seen us burn it. He helped us burn it. And now he's watching the fruits of all of that labor come back in his yard, basically. And he couldn't be happier. I mean, he's ecstatic to know that he is one of our pilot projects. He is also one of our elders on our cultural board. It's amazing to be able to know that, you know, we can bring all of these young minds together. They create these amazing little sub programs that are going on in our burns, and to see them evolve in the way they have, you know, it's awesome. I mean, you cannot have a happier person than my uncle right now, as he stands and looks over his property and sees all of that coming back to life. So it's definitely worth it.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that. And we are running short on time, so I'm going to skip over questions that I feel like we've answered already to some extent and move on to some shorter questions here. So Celine Martinez asks, is there any public disclosure to inform people who are buying a home or property that the area is vulnerable to wildfires? This goes for all panelists.
I'll tell you who will be the first to weigh in on that is the insurance companies.
Yep. Sure.
I mean, we can't get insurance right now for our cabin up in the Dorrington Highway 4 corridor, except for the California Fair Plan, which is really terrible insurance and crazy expensive. I mean, it's undermining so many communities right now, this issue of insurance. And so folks know, I mean, we kind of have to have a reckoning in general about recognizing here in California, they call it the pyro state, right? There is fire everywhere. We have to have a reckoning about having homes in all of these places that are wildfire prone. If you go see some of these maps they have, you can see that they've literally redlined all these different areas. And guess what? These are areas that have been burning for millennia, right? This is not new. Fire is not new to this area. Our ability to understand that we have to live with this is what we need to address in a better way. And it just feels frustrating that the insurance companies kind of run this, and they're really destroying. I mean, it's really rough on a lot of these small mountain communities all over. It's really difficult. And so, you know, I would like to see some traction around that. This issue about, if you're going to move to an area that's fire prone, do it with knowledge, do it understanding what our role is. And, you know, we do up, you know, we clear the space, and we're really careful about, you know, our pine needles and all that kind of stuff. We put a lot of energy into that. We help our neighbors as well. And that's part of this. Creating a fire safe environment is also part of that. And that's always better when you do it as a community, as a group in an area. So,
Yeah.
but, you know, but I think there's so many small and large, you know, towns across the West that are facing this issue right now.
Definitely, because
Yeah, there are. The insurance companies.
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
I was just going to say, insurance is a huge issue, not just for homeowners, but for prescribed fire organizations in general. You know, we're having a real difficult time getting insurance right now, and we'll more than likely have to actually go through our tribal government to get the insurance we need to continue as a prescribed fire lighting company.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to allow us some time for a quick poll because we're reaching towards the end, but we do want to get one more poll sent out to everyone. If our remaining participants can go ahead and answer that, that would be fantastic. It should be up, and if it is not, please let us know. Give it another 20 seconds or so. We're almost there.
Just a few more people who haven't voted, get in those last votes.
I'd just like to address Claire McCoy's question about cultural prescribed burns and indigenous sovereignty, because I think it's such an incredibly important question. Prescribed burn is traditional resource management, is traditional ecological knowledge, is the essence of a tribal's cultural sovereignty and well-being. Fire is part of sovereignty. Fire is part of traditional ecological knowledge. Fire is part of language. It's part of the essence and being of each of these tribal groups. So that's a really good question, because it couldn't be more. Even if you don't own the land, if you can tend the land, care for the land, co-manage the land with the federal entity, you're still taking on sacred responsibility for restoring the world, I guess is how I would say it. And I think Elizabeth has a much better way to say it.
I think you said that very well.
Awesome. Well, Moise, would you like to go ahead and show the results of the poll really quick?
Yeah, and so let's take a look at this. You know, just as fire spreads, so too does grassroots movements and communities. And so let's look at the results of this poll. 75% of people said they will invite a friend to watch before March 26th. In the follow-up email to this event, you can still watch the film until March 26th, and so invite a friend to do so. 56% of people said they will follow the organizations that helped put this event on social media and follow their email lists. Do that as well in the, again, follow-up email that will include next steps for you to do all of these tasks. You can volunteer and get involved locally. 58% again said they would do so. 31% even said they would donate even just a small amount to support more events like this. and 19% of people said they would host a screening of Wilder Than Wild in their communities. Yeah, I just want to pose a little bit of context on this event. This is a community event for Sacramento community hosted by 350 Sacramento. We are, a very small grassroots movement, mostly funded by small donations. And so we definitely would appreciate if you can help put on, the cost of this event. And also would love to have more screenings of Wilder Than Wild across California, across wherever you're watching this from.
Thank you for that. And I know that we are our time. And I know there's a lot of questions that we definitely didn't get to, but please look at your email for the follow-up email that Moise will be sending out here shortly. For all of our information, please feel free to DM us, email us, reach out for any questions. If you have a question that you want a specific panelist to answer, please let us know and we will do our best to get out to them and get you an answer or connect you to them. Because we definitely want you to have all the information that these wonderful people have to offer to you. So I quickly just want to shout out to all of our wonderful panelists again for being here. Thank you for giving up your Friday night to go ahead and share your amazing information with us. I personally learned a lot. Being an Indigenous person doesn't mean I know everything about Native people and their cultures, because we are so diverse and we have so many different cultures in so many different areas. So I personally learned a lot. Thank you so much for being here. And it has truly been an honor to listen to you all tonight. So thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who has come to this event. You are greatly appreciated. And once again, please check your email for the message that we will be sending out to you. Have a great spring break. If you're a Sac State student, stingers up, if I can plug that. But thank you so much. And we really look forward to connecting with you all one way or another. So have a great, fantastic night.
Thank you. Lovely event. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Gosh, I feel buzzy. But I don't know what DMS is.
Like, slide in our DMs, like direct message us. Thank you all.
Is that like texting?
It's like texting, but through social media.
Okay.
I should have said that.
Did anybody else not know? Did everybody know but me? Okay, never mind.
Oh no. Some of us are a little older.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for
Bye,
having
Elizabeth.
us.
Bye, Kelly. So good to see you.
Bye,
Bye.
Kevin. Bye,
Bye.
Stephen. Bye,
Bye,
Elizabeth. Bye, Amanda.
Thanks so much,
Bye,
Kelly,
participants.
Amanda,
It was
Frankie, everybody. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks a
We'll
lot.
see ya. All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you to the rest of our participants that are here, that stuck around. #1 fans. We appreciate you. And with that, have a great spring break. Stay safe. Social distance. And thank you, Frankie and Moise, for collaborating with us on this. And I think it was very successful.
Yeah, our pleasure. Thank you for letting us on board as ESO. Like, allow me to thank the rest, for the rest of the members and all the other officers. We really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and stop the